The Democrats have unleashed articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. One charge: incitement of an insurrection. Now, the thing is, as a lefty, I engaged this in kind of a weird way. At one point, I get the rage and the anger. If you have 4,000 people to drop dead on that particular day, there's rage. If you have a family member that died from COVID and you know that the government wasn't engaging in due diligence in regards to ensuring that people in this country was not beset by illness, there is rage, there is anger in that. If you're one of the people whose businesses closed down and went belly up without the government basically giving you funding, there is rage, especially when you find out that the majority of the money didn't go to the small businesses in a way it was supposed to go to, but by expanding the rule set and expanding the number of people in the businesses that can get their hands on the money, that the majority of the funds went to the top big businesses. There's rage. I'm making the point that in one instance after the next, even before COVID hit, there was rage. The individuals having difficult time making ends meet despite working hours, job after job. All of these things bespeak of people who are very angry and who are very rageful when you look at the way that wealth had basically been sucked to the top. Not just under Trump, but also under Obama, who gave 95% of income gains to the top 1%. This is the guy that they were calling a socialist, and a Muslim socialist at that. The guy who threw his body to protect Wall Street while homeowners went bust. When Donald Trump made the choice that trying to get the wall built was more important than ensuring that people and workers were getting paid, where the government was literally shut down for over a month while he put on political grandstanding for the wall, that gets across how little government gives a shit about the public itself. And yeah, in such, there should be rage. So I understand this idea of people being rageful and pissed off in the way that their world and that their government has been arranged, especially with this kind of safety net that was shown to be basically full of it, especially when you compare it with other countries and other governments that in no way has the wealth of the U.S. government. Yeah, I get the rage. I get the anger. 400,000 people have basically died. 20 million people have basically been infected. If you're one of those people that got medical bills or that have physical symptoms that extend beyond the virus itself, and you know that the government in no way practiced due diligence to ensure that disease didn't hit with the level of force that it hit here. When you see the Bezoses of the world and Walmarts of the world accrue all of this profit, you're talking about like $1 trillion. And yet, our congressmen dance and shake and explain to us, Democrats and Republicans, how there is nothing in the coffers, how Social Security has to be under assault, how Medicare has to be under assault, how ensuring that people got $2,000 a month. Hell, you couldn't even get them $1,200 a month. How all of those things are off the table. You can't even ensure that people have health care. COVID, Medicare for all with COVID. I would say Medicare for all in general. You can't even get that. And that's in the middle of a pandemic. So don't doubt it. I get the rage of this. I myself, my wife always laugh at the way I be screaming on video. Why wouldn't you be screaming? It pisses you off. The world has fallen off of its axis, if it was ever on its axis, especially from the standpoint of the poor and the middle class. And then you always get the don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But you only ever get that when it's us being fucked over. I get the rage. The problem here is the context. They weren't there because of the rageful reasons that I gave, that I would argue would have made a run on the Capitol. They were there for the opposite reason. They were there because the guy that was responsible for the 4,000 people dying on that particular day that they decided to raid the Capitol, that guy wouldn't accept the fact that he lost the race. And in not accepting that and stoking that crowd into getting these people over the course of a month or two into believing that the communists were working with Governor Kemp in order to topple Donald Trump, screaming that he was cheated, screaming that democracy was being undermined, giving out these conspiracy theories. And the reality of it is, there will be some people that will believe him. There will be some that don't care. And all of them will raid and run to the Capitol. There's another violent protest that is supposed to be scheduled for Inauguration Day. I don't necessarily know if they're still going to go through with it, but I would point this out to you, that the raid on the Capitol wasn't an image of failure. It was an image of success. For the alienated, that is a success. And this will likely embolden other actions, despite the repressive actions of the state that will take place in response. The weird part about this is they were going with the idea that Donald Trump actually won, and not just won in a landslide, and that their job was to somehow stop them from certifying the results, with Donald Trump working as hard as he possibly could to invoke a coup. Whether that was talking to political leaders in the various states to try to get them to magically appear votes, whether that was pushing Mike Pence and attacking Mike Pence when Mike Pence wouldn't do what he wanted him to do, it was a coup attempt. Just because he failed, just because it was out in the open, doesn't make it any less a coup attempt. If Donald Trump and that crowd would have gotten what they wanted to do was ignore the election results, to install Donald Trump as God King of something that used to be America. It's a big fucking deal. And if you are in the political space, and if you are one of those people that were made dramatically uncomfortable because Donald Trump wanted to basically overturn the election results, you are going to have feelings about that. The political device itself, the edifice that gives you your powers to some degree, was being attacked and undermined by elements of the public that are in these right-wing militias, right-wing groups, or just basic Trump supporters. And they took it upon themselves, pushed by the president and other Republican members of Congress, took it to basically rebel. I don't know what you call it outside of that. You could say it was poorly done. You could say it failed. You could say that it was opportunistic moments that people could take advantage of in order to try to move. Fair enough. But let's just be very clear that the point of it all was that Trump was cheated, and that Trump and these people who are basically certifying the election results were trying to stop Trump from retaining power. And the point of them being there was to stop the certification of the election results, and making the point that by definition, it was a coup attempt. And honestly, I think people need to reconcile themselves with the fact that you had several Republicans that were in the House and the Senate that were perfectly willing to go along with this coup attempt, and even the pushing of Pence, with a few different outcomes. This would have been dramatically different and dramatically worse. I'm making the point that the political leaders and the political device itself in no way can, nor should they, turn a blind eye to this. And when the first attempt at impeachment being as comically ridiculous as it was, this one has more legs. And I think what you're going to find is that there are going to be some Republicans in the Senate, when this gets around to the Senate, will actually vote to have Trump impeached. Whether or not they have enough votes to do it or not is almost secondary to the point. Is it deserved? Did Donald Trump whip up a mob? Yes. Did Donald Trump refuse to accept the election results? Yes. Did Donald Trump honestly believe that he won the election in a landslide, or was Donald Trump lying just like Donald Trump typically lies? Donald Trump has a history of lying. Donald Trump said before the election, and regardless of whether he wins or loses it, he's never going to concede the election. So there's no reason for me to believe that Donald Trump had anything to give him any belief that he actually won the race. Yes, Donald Trump is guilty of basically what they accuse him of. So whether I think it's divisive or not is kind of besides the point. I thought they should have impeached Bush for the Iraq war. Nancy Pelosi said she knew he was lying. And if you knew he was lying and you get 1 million Iraqis killed, not to mention 4,000 Americans, not to mention $7 trillion, yeah, He deserved to be impeached for it. And when you don't impeach him for it, what kind of precedent does that set going forward with regards to other presidents in their casual way in which they're perfectly willing to invade other countries or drop all of this money into paying terrorists and all of this other nonsense? If they impeached Bush for doing that behavior, would Bush have been more, or would the people coming behind Bush been more or less likely to invade other countries in this kind of casual way? I suspect less likely if Bush was impeached. I even go so far as to suspect that the reason they didn't impeach Bush is because they wanted the presidents to have the ability to implicitly go into other countries without fault from Congress. If a president of the United States who gets his power from being part of this political device, when he loses the race, decides, I'm not leaving. And not just I'm not leaving, I'm going to do everything within my power in this office to try to get other people to back me and not leaving, to try to take power when I wasn't able to win it. If that person is able to go without any kind of punishment or any kind of response from the political device, what is the next one like? And does it incentivize additional attempts at attacks on sovereignty of the country in the future? Yeah, I think it does. And yeah, I think that they do have to actually push for impeachment. And honest to God, if the Republican Party, in this case, was being earnest with themselves and recognizing that their ability to get in office in and of itself is entirely dependent upon this device, meaning you may get Republicans in the Senate that is perfectly willing to push to impeach Trump. I would say this is an open question this time around. The first time around, not so much. This time around, it is unclear. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate the opportunity for allowing me to do it. Like I said, this is very weird to me. When these guys attacked the Capitol, 4,000 people had died from COVID on that day. How do I reconcile that? I get the rage, I get the anger, but their reasoning was utterly ridiculous. And then not just ridiculous, if they got what they wanted, they would have basically toppled the government of this country. That's a big fucking deal. On top of that point, when I say that 4,000 people died, that in of itself should make people viciously angry. Because it means that your government in and of itself has basically not just dropped the ball, but utterly failed across the board. Nancy Pelosi, $1.8 trillion that Donald Trump was offering, and Nancy Pelosi basically refused, then turned around and accepted $900 billion. And Garden likes to point out that initially it was $3 trillion, meaning she ends up accepting a third when she said that $1.8 trillion was entirely insufficient. Utterly astonishing. So I understand why people were angry. I guess my point is that the reason that those people were there wasn't for those issues. It wasn't because there were poverty. It wasn't because people were living on the street. It wasn't because nearly half of the country is poor. 42% of the country before COVID hit was making $18,000 a year. I don't know whether you realize how little that is to live off, but it's little of nothing. Nearly half of the country was there, and it's only gotten worse. So from the standpoint of people about to be evicted, from people not having a job, from people having to accept less in a job, from people who have family members that have died from COVID, I understand all of the anger for this stuff. I get it. I totally get it. But the thing that people need to wrap their heads around is that's not why they were there. And why they were there, the context, the reason, whether it's just or not matters greatly. The reason was not just. But if the reasons were based around these other things, would it have been? And I come to the conclusion of yes. And that's the oddity for me. I have to reconcile those two things. That part of me feels like I get why people are pissed off. But the other part, it gets me, that's not why they were there. The articles of impeachment introduced Monday by Representatives David Saline, Ted Lieu, and Jamie Raskin. One charge: incitement of an insurrection. Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by willfully inciting violence against the government of the United States. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled the co-equal branch of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. I don't know how people argue with that. All of that is true. This is a video called Anatomy of an Attack. And it gives this kind of just basic look of what this was like. I think people need to reconcile themselves that this is probably only going to get worse. And a lot of this has to do with an economic system that is basically failing miserably. I don't think people get this amped up entirely for a single issue. I do think that the large number of people that ended up at the Capitol was there for more than just the one reason of Donald Trump, even though the Donald Trump might have been this kind of organizing factor or organizing basis. Take a look at this and keep in mind, at the end of all of this, Donald Trump looked at his crowd and said, wow, that's lowbrow. Think about that. He gins up all of these people to attack the Capitol. And then when he's looking at it, he's like, that's lowbrow. That's lowbrow. Let's take a look at the video. This one.
We will not go quietly into the night.
And we need to march on the Capitol today.
We are going to take our country back.
We're coming for you, and we're going to have a good time doing it.
Let's have trial by combat.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength. We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you, to the Capitol.
In 2 hours, this woman will be dead.
We are now walking down the inaugural path to the Capitol building.
Oh, there we go.
The U.S. Capitol has been breached.
This black cop that's running away, they had a conversation with many of the cops that were there, especially in the building, where as the white cops, some of them were taking photos and whatnot with the protesters and the people who stormed the building. The black cops were fucking terrified and getting called all sorts of names and whatnot under threat. This was not a pleasant, let's say, multiracial event. And the black cops and the stories that these guys are telling gets that across. They also believe that their management basically left them in the lurch, meaning in this moment, they thought they were left to their own devices. They were fucking terrified. Let's keep going.
5 minutes since Capitol breach.
Now, you tell me, what is the guy with the zip ties doing? Why does he have zip ties? Be honest. Do you think the zip ties are there for show when he's jumping off the side of the thing in gear and everything else? Do you think that he's holding on to zip ties for shits and giggles? Or do you think the zip ties were going to be used to actually catch people, catch congressmen, have them as hostages? Otherwise, why are you wasting time carrying on those items? I'm making the point that the plans here might have failed in regards to the specific details of the plans, because clearly people had plans. But that's almost besides the point. The fact that they were there to do that in the first place is extremely problematic. That doesn't even get to the pipe bombs that were found. And honestly, if they would have gotten their hands on members of Congress, what would have happened? Be honest. I mean, in this case, you have egging on. Let's assume for the moment that a lot of this just took place from opportunism. that you have some cops that might have been in on it that pulled these guys in. People's like, yes, we're going into the Capitol. Everybody's raged, excited. Everybody's adrenaline is going. They're being egged on by the mob. What happens when some of these people gets their hands on a congressman?
I call on President Trump to go on national television now and demand an end to this siege.
At least one improvised explosive device has been found on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol.
Repeatedly being told by the National Guard at the national level that we did not have authorization.
We love you. You're very special.
After attacking the Capitol and after being pushed to go out and tell the mob to, hey, can you tell the mob to stop attacking the Capitol? Trump gives that video where he basically tells them, hey, I love you. You're great. He was being juiced up and energized by the fact that he was able to get all of these people to basically siege the Capitol and go after Pence and some of the other Republicans that wouldn't follow and toe his particular line. Whatever you want to think of Trump, whatever you want to think of Pelosi and Democrats, if you take away, let's say, the political actors and their own identities and everything else, and you go just purely from the standpoint of political entities, one political entity basically tried to topple the entire apple cart when they lost. The other political entity takes the tack that that's not acceptable and has decided to go after him. The problem or the weirdness with this is they went after him for something else that was utterly and entirely ridiculous. With this, I would argue, has more legs. Like Chris Christie said, if you don't impeach a president for this, what the hell do you impeach him for? Now, a lot of people can make the point that Donald Trump is going to be out of office anyway within a week or so, but that's almost besides the point. The impeachment prevents the person from ever being able to get back in office again. More than an impeachment, what's interesting to me is the 14th Amendment issue. This is the people like Ted Cruz and some of the other Republicans that were in the House and in the Senate that were egging this stuff on. You must understand, contesting of election in and of itself is not an impeachable offense or a 14th Amendment offense. People can contest elections if they believe that the election went squirrely. I mean, you had Jamarl herself, if I'm not mistaken, who contested the election at one point. And of course, in 2001, you had contesting of the election. But if you remember, Al Gore gavelled all of those people down, especially when they didn't have any kind of Senate Democrats to assist. And in other situations, the same thing. Biden gavelled his own people down when they were trying to make that claim. Meaning, making the claim in and of itself, there's no problem with that. Trying to overturn an election result that is pretty clear at this point that you lost, or at the very least you don't have any real evidence attesting to the fact that there's any kind of cheating going on, that's something fundamentally different. Nancy Pelosi wielding the 14th Amendment here after going after Trump. Did those members of Congress basically push forward an insurrection? Yes. Whether they believed it or not, almost is kind of secondary to the point that they still did it. If they were doing it for political reasons, that makes it worse. And I would argue makes the 14th Amendment Section 3 that much more pertinent. Yeah, I'm being somewhat of a hard ass on this because these guys basically tried to overturn the government itself when they didn't necessarily like the results. It's the exact same reason of such a hard ass when it comes to Sanders on this notion of all of these other members of the Democratic Party raising their hands saying, yeah, if Sanders got the number of delegates but didn't necessarily have enough to clinch it, yeah, all of us will be trying to get them to go to a second round, something that doesn't necessarily take place, meaning all of us will try to rip it out of Sanders' hands. Again, it's the same motif or the same idea. Under normal circumstances, under normal politics, if it's somebody we like, we'll act a particular way. When it's somebody we don't particularly like or we don't like the result, we're going to change the rules. In that sense, they were changing the rules on Sanders, where all of them are basically saying, yeah, we'll rip it out of his hands. But under normal circumstances, they would basically lean to the person with the most votes. I'm making the point in the same way I'm a hard ass on that point, pointing out that that's not a democratic system. That's a system that basically, as long as we're winning, we'll follow the rules. Well, the same thing was basically taking place on the federal level, with Trump basically saying, yeah, when I beat Clinton, everything is great. I'm going to follow the rules because I succeeded with the rule set. When the rule set shows me to lose, well, then I want to change the rules. I have no time for that. Zero time for that. It's one thing if you're going to go through a democratic system and you're trying to make the rule changes and everything else. It's one thing if you're trying to make these kind of aggressive moves for the best of reasons. This kind of goes back to the point that if you had a multiracial coalition raiding the Capitol because 4,000 people had died that day and nearly 400,000 people had died and nearly 12 million people were infected and they couldn't pass Medicare for all and they weren't expanding Social Security and they weren't increasing the minimum wage. If those were the reasons, then fair enough. You might even get my applaud. Fuck. They might even have a picture of me with you. Context matters. That's not what this was. This not only was not that, this was basically trying to overturn the will of tens of millions of people and doing so for entirely selfish reasons. How could I be wrong? Or how could it be wrong with Democrats taking this tack? Whatever I think of Democrats. I'll leave it here. People may disagree with me on this point. And this isn't necessarily a rah-rah for Democrats, but I take a very dim view of what they were trying to accomplish, what they were trying to pull off. And I don't think people realize, I mean, if they're willing to do this now, you realize this only gets worse. Like, at some point, the Democratic Party doesn't quite get that the reason, the level of consternation that is out there, the reason that the political parties have moved so far to the right is because of them. Yes, the Republican Party may take advantage of the fact that Democrats move to the right and move further, but ultimately you're talking about a party that was supposed to, on some level, represent the interests of the working class. And that is now off the table. Both political parties are basically captured by corporate interests, meaning the poor and the middle class does not have a dog in the hunt, not just not have a dog in the hunt, basically languishing in political obscurity. Does that create anger? Yes. Does that create hostility and resentment towards the political system? Yes. Especially when it seems like the political system is not attending to the needs of the population itself. Our politics are going to be fractured. They're going to be contested. It's going to be angry and everything else, as long as you have a system where it seems like people are basically at each other's throats for the most slimmest of resources. What happens if our system ensured that people had the things that they needed to get from point A to point B, to ensure that you weren't just struggling from cradle to the grave? Would you have this level of hostility and anger? I don't think so. Do you even get a Trump in office in the first place? I don't think so. The political space opens up for somebody like Trump, or for that matter, somebody like Sanders, because basically the center drops the ball in regards to dealing with the real needs and becomes discredited. This is one of those things that Lenin was arguing when he was like, the worst thing from his standpoint, meaning from Lenin's standpoint, that the government, or the provisional government could have did was end the war. The fact that the war wasn't ended, the fact that they weren't attending to the needs of the population itself basically allows insurgents or create vacuums in those areas where people go to try to get those things attended to. My point is that Donald Trump is there entirely because of the failure of the political system, not as a rejuvenation of that system or as accolades of that system. And there is nothing to stop the next one from coming in that is far more competent when the needs of the public are not attended to. Mark my words, the Democrats might have a House, a bare majority in the Senate, and the presidency. But if you remember, Obama had that at one point. And if you remember, Republicans also had that at one point. The public is searching for some out, and it's not finding it in the political parties, nor is it finding it on the fringe. A, Trump, or in the political parties, meaning the Democrats and Republicans, and this kind of sloshing back and forth gets that across. I'll end this here. I just want to point out, from my perspective, under normal circumstances, for me, I look at it and say, well, fuck, if you weren't willing to impeach Bush, how are you going to impeach Trump for this nonsense that Joe Biden himself admitted to? But this is different. This is not accepting the election results and trying to literally topple the government of the United States in order to remain in power after losing a race. Those people basically were trying to keep Trump in. 4,000 people died on the day that they were trying to keep the person in who was responsible for those 4,000 people dying. Like, share,